Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content, and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and before we go any further, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on that bell notification. That way, when we are doing our thing, YouTube lets you know. Today, we have another episode of my board game collection, Shelf by Shelf, and today I'll be covering shelf number 15. So let's get straight to it with shelf number 15, and here we go. And first of all, outside, we have a Game of Thrones, The Living Card Game, designed by Eric Lang and Nate French. And this is a really cool LCG based on the Game of Thrones intellectual property, of course, which is a very popular, massively successful IP right now. But basically, this is a 2 to 4 player game, and I like the idea that it can accommodate up to 4 players, because usually these LCGs are usually 2-player only types of games or 2-sided games. This game clearly has 3 or 4 people potentially playing, which is cool because it fits the theme where Game of Thrones has a lot of houses vying for control. And basically each player takes on one of the houses of Westeros and has their specific deck of cards. And as you keep on adding content to this game, it is a living card game. That means they continue to put out content, and this game is still in cycle. I believe there's a lot of expansions that are still being printed for this game. So you could add and do some deck construction and perhaps mix a few cards from other houses into your respective house's deck. But right now I'm just playing basically with the houses that come in the base game, and each house has their strengths and their weaknesses and all the characters that you know from the series and even from the books. And each of these characters have stats and values in 3 different categories. There's 3 different categories that players are battling in. You've got straight up military or war power. You have what the game refers to as intrigue, and you also have what it refers to just as power. And power is the end game condition, because if you ever get to a certain amount of power, I believe it's 15, you win the game. And basically you're competing in all of these different battles, and you're tapping your cards, rotating them 90 degrees clockwise to indicate that you're using them or attacking another player. And then other players have to tap their cards and say which ones they're defending with, right? Because you want to defend, because if you don't defend and you give a player an uncontested victory, they're going to get an additional power point besides whatever other benefit they would have had for winning. So even if you're going to lose, more often than not, you want to contest these battles. And it's all about manipulating the situation and trying to figure out when's the best time to attack with who, when's the best time to defend and with who, and also just how to best manipulate the particular powers that you find on these different cards, like your typical living card games, collectible card game type of gameplay. Really cool. If you like the IP, it's a must-have, a Game of Thrones, the living card game. And right behind that, we have the Tower of Babel, designed by Reiner Knizia and published by Rio Grande Games. And this game here is actually, don't know what this is doing here, that's what happens when you're a daddy. This game right here is actually on my top 10 underrated board games of all time. You should check out that video where I actually talk about underrated games, not board games that are underrated because they're ranked 200 when they really should be ranked 100. You know, like, these games are really unrecognized, unacknowledged in the industry, but they're really good games. This is an area majority game where very abstracted, very graphically speaking, ugly. It's not a pretty looking game as far as graphic design is concerned. It's not have any aesthetic appeal to it whatsoever, but mechanically speaking, it's a sound area majority game where players are almost collaborating in the attempt to build these 7 or actually 8 wonders of the game, as the Tower of Babel is included as an 8th wonder. And players are basically offering resources and building materials to help the active player build the stages of the different wonder. And the active player is obviously going to get some benefit from contributing to that. He or she is going to place some of their workers or their pieces to represent their presence on that wonder and to start working on their area majority. But the player who they choose to allow to assist them, because the active player can only accept the offer of 1 player per turn, that player who helped them is also going to get a benefit. They're also going to get the possibility of placing a presence there according to the amount of cards that they contributed, the resources that they contributed to the building of that wonder. And it's really cool because you also have some tokens that you collect along the way as you build the wonders, which also add an additional set collection aspect to the game that exponentially increases the amount of points you will have the more of those tokens you collect. And also each wonder that you complete scores the person who has the majority a certain amount of points. It scores the person who has the secondary amount a few less points, and then any other player who's there, whether they're third, fourth, or fifth, gets a consolation prize of about 3 points. But with each subsequent wonder that's completed, you have this scoring track that goes down, and that increases the value of the points that the majority leader will get. So the discrepancy between first to second and second to third is going to increase with each and every subsequent scoring round. So timing the completion of the wonders is part of this game. And again, you got this really cool semi-collaborative aspect to the game, Tower of Babel. And then what do we have next? All right, so from left to right, we have Scarab Lords there. That's another Reiner Knizia game, 2-player tactical card game. Also on my underrated board games, I believe. This is Reiner Knizia's first response before the Blue Moon design to games like Magic the Gathering, where players take asymmetric sides and play cards down turn by turn, and they're vying for control over different areas of Egypt. And basically there's 6 different areas, and they're split into 2 sides, Upper and Lower Egypt, and you need to control 2 areas on each side, Upper and Lower Egypt, by the beginning of your turn, and that guarantees you the win. And you're playing these cards, and it's really neat because there's so much restrictions to the card play, because all of the different cards, while they're very cool and give you lots of great benefits and they give you power totals, they have restrictions on them as to what phase of the turn you can play. The round is divided into 3 phases, level 0, level 1, and level 2 phase. And you can only play a card on its specific phase, and you can only play 1 card per phase. So if you have 2 amazing cards, but they're phase 1 cards, let's say, you're limited to only playing 1. Also, some of these cards, many of them, most of them, are limited as to what regions you could put them. You can't just play them on any region. You have to place them on particular regions. So mapping that all out, figuring it all out, and trying to be the victor is a beautiful and wonderful challenge. Scarab Lords. The next game here is Taj Mahal, another Reiner Knizia game. So this is my Reiner Knizia shelf here, guys. I'm a big fan of Reiner Knizia. So Taj Mahal, one of my favorite Reiner Knizia games. This is an Indian themed game where the board is a map of India, and it's divided into 12 regions. And one by one, we're traveling through all those regions, and we have these modular markets that we place on the regions to determine which will be number 1, which will be number 2, and so on and so forth. But we always have the last city of Agra. It's always going to be the last round. It's going to be the 12th region we go to. But the first 11 rounds are up for grabs, and they're randomly decided at the beginning of the game as we shuffle these market tiles. And one by one, we go through all these regions, and we're playing a little bit of an auction bidding game where we're playing down different cards that have different symbols on them representing all the different court officers. You got the princess, the vizier, the monk, the military general, and of course you got the mogul or ruler himself. And basically, as you're playing down these cards, you're trying to have majorities in all of these different symbols representing the leaders. And at one point, you have to eventually drop out because you only play cards of the same color type. And what happens is, if you have the most in any of those categories, at the time you drop out, you actually win those categories. So it's not about necessarily staying in the auction. It's about knowing the timing as to when is best and most optimal to drop out. And then for each court official whose favor you've won, you get to place a palace in that particular region. And each palace, or whether you place 1 or multiple palaces, is only going to score you 1 point. However, what happens is, as you place these palaces on the board, they form an interconnected network of palaces that all line up and contiguously connect to one another. And every time you build a palace, if it connects through 1 or more regions, you score 1 additional point for every region it connects into. So that's really cool, as you have this little bit of an abstract spatial, orientation, spatial intelligence type of game where you're trying to figure out where's the best place to place your palaces in order to connect them in the future. You also have this market with a bunch of different resources, and as you collect resources throughout the game, these different goods, you actually have this repeated scoring, kind of like Castles of Burgundy, although Taj Mahal is much older, where every time you score a resource in future turns, if you get a resource of the same type, not only do you score the additional new resources you just collected, collected, but you also score all the resources of that same type that you have previously collected. So they keep on scoring you points. And you see the markets and you see the resources that are available from the beginning of the game. So you can kind of map out, there's a little bit of planning. This is a planning type game where you can kind of map out which regions you're most interested from the very beginning of the game, and maybe save your battles in your cards for those situations, and maybe give up some of the regions that you perhaps are a little bit less interested in. All right, so that's Taj Mahal. Then we got Celtis, again, another Reiner Knizia game. This is the board game implementation of his very popular Lost Cities, except this game can accommodate up to 4, I think maybe even 5 players. And you've got all these different tracks that players are moving up. It's very abstracted. The board is just representing spaces that you're trying to advance on. And every time you play a card in ascending or descending order, you get to advance on these tracks. And the further you make it on those tracks, the more points you score. But be careful. You don't want to start a track that you cannot make it to a certain depth in, because if you start a track and you don't make it too far, you can potentially get negative points. Now, it's interesting because one of the things that they've added to this game that Lost Cities does not have is the fact that you can choose at the start of the game, as you play cards down, you can choose whether or not you want to make the cards be played in ascending or descending order, while Lost Cities is more limited in the sense that you can only do it in ascending order. Also, this game adds another side game to the game because you got this set collection that could score you tons of points as well. So it adds again to Lost Cities, which is a pretty sound game, and makes it a little bit more robust. That is Celtis. Then we move on to Hollywood, Golden Age, and this again is Reiner Knizia. This entire shelf here is Reiner Knizia, except for Game of Thrones, the card game. And this is basically a reprint. This is a Spanish production from Ludanova Games because I could not find an English copy. This game has been out of print in North America for many, many years. It's been known as Trump Fabric, Hollywood Blockbuster, what else? I can't even think of the other names, but it's gone by so many different names, so many different titles, sometimes with real actors, sometimes with parody actors. But here we got the classic Golden Age actors like Clark Gable and such. And basically players are recruiting directors and actors and seamstresses and cameramen and agents. And you're trying to get all of these components, and they all represented by different tiles that you place on your script tile. You got a script of particular movies, and these are all famous movies from the Golden Age of Hollywood, and they score you a specific amount of points just for the script itself. But if you could get a good cast of characters and directors on it, or guest stars even, it can add a lot to the points. And basically, you're trying to get points for having the most valuable or most successful movie from round to round. But at the end of the game, you're also going to score for having the most successful movie in each of the 3 respective genres. You got comedy, romance, and action, I believe. And you even get a bonus scoring points at the end of the game for having the worst movie, the worst film. So perhaps you might be trying to work on the best and the worst film at the same time. Really cool, really thematic, nice board, Hollywood Golden Age. And then finally, the last game on this shelf right here is Through the Desert, again Reiner Knizia. This is a very much abstracted game where players are placing down their nicely colored camels, and they're forming a network of connections to link them to different water sources. You got water holes, you got oases, and these will score you tons of points throughout the game. But also, there's a little bit of a majority game being played, because if you have the majority in each of the 5 respective colors of camels, you'll score an additional amount of bonus points for that. Also, it's, again, very abstracted. You have this kind of like a Go mechanism, like the ancient game of Go, where if you surround a player's camels, you can eliminate them, and basically, because you're cutting their source to any life, because the life is represented by the different water sources. And also you get to score additional points at the end of the game for all the different hexagon spaces that are inside that little enclosement that you just made. Really cool, really fun abstracted game with beautiful pieces through the desert. And that's it for today's episode of my board game collection, Shelf by Shelf. This was shelf number 15. Thank you so much for joining us here when Harry Met Board Games. Please consider clicking on one of the videos that you see on the screen right now. Also, check in the description down below for a link to our Patreon account and see how you can support this channel and become more involved with the behind-the-scene process. Research and find a tier that works for you. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.